I think we are actually live.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I
Should we
think.
get started? Okay, wonderful. Well, hello everybody that is tuned in on Facebook and or watching it later. My name is Niki Ashton. I'm the Member of Parliament for Churchill, Kiiwetinoong, Aski, and also the Transport Critic for the NDP. And I am extremely honored to be doing a Facebook Live with the #1 advocate for consumers here in Canada for air passengers, Gabor Lukacs. Thank you so much, Gabor, for making this Facebook Live possible, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. It's a rare opportunity where actually a member of parliament who spends so much time on an issue that affects passengers.
Well, I was very excited, obviously, about the idea to talk with you in general because you are, like I said, the preeminent voice here in our country when it comes to what air passengers, what Canadians are going through, the way they're being taken advantage of by airlines, but also frankly by their government's support of airlines. You've done a lot of work, we all know, on the air passenger Bill of Rights and advocating for an air passenger Bill of Rights, advocating to close loopholes on the air passenger Bill of Rights. But I would say your advocacy has also been extremely important during this time of crisis. We're dealing with a global pandemic of COVID-19, and we know that early on in this pandemic, many Canadians were hit financially because of the way in which their bookings, their trips were canceled, were moved around, and instead of receiving refunds, which is what usually happens, and what other countries have done. Here in Canada, the Canada Transport Agency, and of course through the support of the government, allowed for airlines to issue vouchers. And I'm wondering, I've heard about this very serious issue and the way consumers have been taken advantage of. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a bit about what the last couple of months have been like for you. How many people have you heard from? How many Canadians have you heard from about this latest way in which airlines have been taking advantage of consumers?
Um, in terms of the numbers, before this pandemic took place, we had about 15,000 members. Now we have close to 30,000. So the number of members has nearly doubled. In terms of the number of daily posts, it went by a factor of 2, whether you get comments or posts. So we are talking about an event that has had a profound impact on all travelers. And in terms of what happened, there is a kind of limbo because the Canadian Transportation Agency issued a statement to the effect that endorses the airlines providing vouchers. But then we challenged it in the Federal Court of Appeal, and then in response to that challenge, they backtraced somewhat and they issued a second, similarly misleading statement called FAQ. But in that statement, they're actually saying that this was not really a legally binding statement, and they're trying to a little bit backpedal, but still endorsing the airlines, issuing vouchers more as a kind of, I guess they want to portray at that time as moral endorsement. The damage has already been done, by the way, because we do see that misleading statement on vouchers being circulated all around, and when people are seeking a chargeback, they see that voucher come back to them, that statement of vouchers. That's what the airlines are always citing when somebody is actually trying to exercise their right to chargeback. The government is clearly acting in an irresponsible manner here. They have abdicated their responsibility to the public. They have abdicated their responsibility to consumers to uphold the rule of law.
So these are some very clear numbers, that indicate, how many Canadians are dealing with a very frustrating situation. In addition to obviously this personal health or public health crisis, pardon me. So to hear that the membership of your Facebook group has doubled, to hear about the inundation of messages that you've received, that is an indication of just how many Canadians are in this difficult situation. And, we know that there has also been some media coverage of it as well, but I would argue not enough. Now, I know you've also stepped up and again, the incredible advocate that you are on behalf of so many. I know that you are also pushing for legal action on this front. Can you tell us a bit about that, and especially with respect to the Canadian Transportation Agency's statement that, of course, is the foundation of the airlines' drive to only issue vouchers and not reimbursements?
I'm not sure if it is a foundation in the sense that probably it was the airlines who first wanted to issue vouchers, and then the Canadian Transportation Agency was rubber stamping it
Supported
in terms of it's. I would love to be a fly on the wall and see what kind of phone calls were going on there, what kind of messages were being exchanged there, in terms of. How would the Canadian Transportation Agency come up with something so absurd and overnight? That's something that still baffles me. What we have done is we launched a court application in the Federal Court of Appeal, asking the Federal Court of Appeal to clarify that this is not a legally binding document. The Canadian Transportation Agency has been now tainted by reasonable apprehension of bias because they have spoken publicly on a matter that would normally come before them as a dispute. So understand that a judge should not be commenting on a case that they would be judging. Appropriate. And that the Canadian Transportation Agency be ordered to take down the voucher statement, and we are required to communicate to everybody who was misled that this was indeed an inaccurate statement, and some kind of clarification that the court would prescribe. Now, at the same time, because we are dealing with an urgent matter, people need the money now. People need to get groceries, they need to pay bills. This cannot be dragged on for months or years. We also made an application for a motion for an interlocutory injunction. That's a temporary injunction. And until the whole case is being heard by the court, which will be heard by a three-judge panel, there will be some interim measure to provide relief to the public. And we filed our reply in relation to that in the Federal Court of Appeal last Thursday, and now we are waiting to hear the court about that temporary measure. We are asking that until the matter is decided, we will have something in place, something to.
And of course, I know you talked earlier about how, of course, there are delays with because of the COVID-19 crisis. Do you have a sense of when you may be hearing back?
Well, every judge will tell you will hear back from me as soon as possible. Judges themselves are doing their very best. They are struggling with a situation that they don't necessarily have access to their offices, home. They have many urgent matters to deal with. So we are grateful that in this case, the Federal Court agreed to expedite the motion. Came out about that recognized the urgency in having some form of judicial determination temporary. So I'm sure the court understands that this is many tens and probably needs some kind of. But this is not a matter to be taken lightly. It's when a body which is supposed to be impartial, so much strays into the fray and so much engages in advocacy for industry to regulate, that it requires some significant. I would be the last person to complain that the court. Just to give you. We're talking here about hundreds of pages of evidence and thousands of pages. At some point, also the National Airline Council of Canada attempted to button into the. They submitted something like 1,050 pages of documents. That was. we can decide this case. But this happened only in a span of a couple of weeks. So we are of course we are of course opening every email with that kind of leap. Our heart leaps that, okay, is it the one? Is this the one that will tell us what is the fate of the. And to bear in mind that the temporary injunction is just the first step. The application itself, the main case, would be.
Absolutely. If I can just share on my end, I've heard from constituents, Gabor, who, were some who were basically stranded in effect in countries when Canada started imposing the measures, urging people to come back, I've heard from constituents who have booked multiple tickets, and have gone into debt as a result. And I know you've talked about the fact that credit card companies as well have been part of the problem and refusing to issue reimbursements or cancel payments rather, and transactions, and recognizing that, and I've heard from people who have said, I'm already stressed. I've heard from people who, in one case, this person is on a temporary layoff, and so, what are they going to do to? They've since come back home. What are they going to do to be able to deal with the debt that they've accrued? Because again, they have more than one voucher that is essentially useless to them. I've heard from other. Other constituents who've had to cancel travel later on, and still unsure about possibly travel further down the line. Again, we don't know how this virus, where things will be at in the next few months, but some have already taken the step to cancel travel, and again, they're sitting with these vouchers. These are heartbreaking stories, and again, what I find shocking is the fact that so many Canadians are dealing with, financial insecurity at this time because of COVID-19, and then you have this added layer of debt, of insecurity, that's been put on them by airlines, and obviously supported through the Canada Transportation Agency. Are these the kinds of stories that you've heard from people as well?
Yes, this is, of course, you being closer to your constituency, you hear it from even more on the personal stories. What we end up hearing is often just different companies, but overall, everybody has to understand, even people who are not affected by it here and now, that you cannot take a voucher access with it. You cannot take a voucher and buy groceries with it. You cannot pay with it. You cannot pay your utility bills with it, your car insurance. So my response to all those hypocrites who are claiming that people should be accepting vouchers, nice to the airlines, is that as soon as the government is going to travel voucher to pay my taxes, I will be happy to accept vouchers. Not until then. What the airlines are doing is something not that different from a person who was laid off, who needs to feed his or her family, walking into a supermarket, filling their basket and getting to a cash. Here's an IOU. I'm sure you understand. Family, I will come back and pay the bill once over. Maybe some grocery stores would extend such credit to individuals they are worthy for it, trustworthy, and so on. But we cannot run an economy that way. It's not simply a question of right or wrong. It's simply a question of whether we have one law for corporations, another law for private individuals, or do we have equality before another law? What I'm finding so profoundly troubling in how the government approaches this is that it creates the impression the government thinks that actually citizens are less than large. Citizens have less rights. Citizens have less. They're subject to more stringent rules. So if you go and put your hand into the pocket of someone else, of course, this will come and arrest you, and then we will be sentenced by jail for theft. But if airline another large corporation does it in the whole facade, the whole smoke screen of oh, difficult times, then the person who's involved in it, or the business executives who are involved in it, they will be businessmen and women of the year and not petty criminals, which is what these people are when they are refusing.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your point about this double standard. Now, I know you actually shared with me some recent news coming out of Europe and legal action there to prohibit airlines from doing the same as Canada. Could you tell us a bit about what's going on in Europe at this time?
In terms of the background in Europe, which has the gold standard of passenger protection, the law has been very clear that if the airline cancels your flight, you are entitled to a refund within days. They can offer you a voucher and you can say no, and then they have to give you a refund to the original form of payment within. Airlines have been disobeying the law there as well. It's not unique to Canada. What is different in Europe is that in Europe, the European Union, European been very clear that the law has to be obeyed. The airlines, and not only the airlines, but actually 12 states within the European Union have been pushing back against it and have been trying to lobby the European Union at like a federal level to say, well, you should give a pass to the airlines. Let's just issue vouchers. It'll be all good. Trust us. And just today, the European Union came out with a statement. No. It is one thing for airlines to offer vouchers and try to make vouchers attractive to passengers. That's legitimate. That's business. But airlines cannot impose vouchers on. And actually, the states that have been harboring that kind of unlawful behavior are now going to face consequences. So they just took legal action in the European Union, not against the airlines simply, but against the states that have been facilitating this kind of unlawful conduct. And I wish it was happening.
Yes, me too. Well, I mean, this is unprecedented and really, I mean, like you said, it's a reflection of the much stronger legislative protections, legal protections for consumers, airline consumers in Europe. But I mean, this is incredible. If only we were to see something like this in Canada as well. So I know, obviously, Gabor, part of this whole discussion is obviously political, and and we need to we need to make sure that those of us that are obviously on the political side of things are advocating. And I know from our end, I joined with my colleague Brian Massey, who's our critic on industry, and we did reach out to the Minister of Transport, Minister Garneau. And we criticized this practice by airlines in giving vouchers instead of reimbursements. We called out the treatment of Canadian consumers at this time, and we called on the minister to step in. Now, unfortunately, we have not heard back, and this is a bit in line with other issues we've raised with other ministers. And obviously, this is an unprecedented time that all ministers' offices are dealing with. But to me, the fact that this has been met with silence when we know that this is a glaring issue that thousands of Canadians have been impacted, it's just not acceptable to hear anything. But I know you have some questions for me relating to to the need for political advocacy, and I wanted to give you a chance to ask them as well.
I certainly do, and I appreciate the opportunity. My first question is that I think that many of the people who are following this broadcast from the air passenger rights community and who was advertised also in our Facebook have maybe some lack of clarity about what is actually the standard toolbox of a parliamentarian. As a member of parliament, you see something which is so wrong as this, what the airlines are doing, what government is doing. What can you do? You are actually, unfortunate, the minister, you are not even part of the governing party. So what, as an opposition member, what is your toolbox?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good good question. First off, I do want to be very clear that it is really important for Canadians going through this situation and other similar situations to reach out to their MPs, whether or not they are part of the government or opposition. In fact, if they are part of the opposition, they probably have a greater chance of raising this issue in a more public sense. And in a regular sitting of Parliament, what part of the toolbox is, of course, writing a letter to the minister involved, raising it in committees, parliamentary committees, and in our case, it would be the Transport and Infrastructure Parliamentary Committee. And of course, there is a question period, which, as we all know, is sort of the more showy or dramatic side of Parliament, but a chance to really shine a light on urgent issues and hold the government to account. Now, that's the part of the normal toolbox. We know obviously petitions are also a very important tool, can be a very important tool as well. The challenge right now is, of course, COVID-19 meant that we had to close Parliament in mid-March. It was a decision based on public health. Obviously, when you have 338 MPs flying across the country every week, it was acknowledged that we could be super carriers and bring COVID-19 back and forth and of course make our communities sick as well. And so Parliament was shut down as of the second week of March. Now, I've been a proponent early on since the shutdown for a virtual parliament. This is something that many countries around the world moved on quite quickly. And I would say it took a little bit longer for Canada, but we have started. We're now in the third week of a virtual parliament, but it's still very limited. Now, we know we don't have a regular question period. It's a committee setup, so people have longer periods of time to ask questions of ministers. And ministers have a little bit longer to answer, which of course many times means not a longer non-answer than what we hear in regular question period. But I will say, it is a start, but it's only so far 2 days a week. There is still the Wednesday in-person sitting, so the virtual parliament is Tuesday and Thursday, and then Wednesday it's the limited sitting of, I believe, just over 30 MPs in Parliament. But again, it's that committee setup, so there are fewer blocks of time within which opposition MPs can speak, as opposed to a regular question period. And so I would say, yes, it's a start, but it's not enough. The other problematic piece is that a number of virtual committees of Parliament are sitting virtually, but the Transport Committee is not one of them. This is something that I've raised with my own colleagues who are in discussions with other House leaders and whips who decide on which committees sit. And one of the things that I've made very clear is that the transport sector is one where it's an essential service during this time. It is also one in which we know where workers are calling for more protections. It's one in which we know that consumers are demanding protections, particularly with airlines, but we're seeing it as well in other sectors as well, rail, bus, and we need to shine a light on this. And so I am disappointed that the government and perhaps other parties, I'm not sure where the other parties are at in terms of reconvening the Transport Committee, but it has not been reconvened yet, which means that another tool in that toolbox is not available to me and to my colleague Taylor Bachrach, who's our infrastructure critic. So so right now. That toolbox is a lot more limited, but I think that it's really important that we keep up the pressure, again, through letter writing, through all the avenues we have, and especially through social media. And I know that you and the air passenger advocates have done an incredible job in reaching out to MPs and to the minister on social media to make these points clear. Although I understand from your previous advocacy that I don't know if you're still blocked, but that the Minister of Transport blocked you on Twitter, which is I think a really bad sign of the government's willingness to ask tough questions even before this crisis.
Last time I checked, it was a while ago, but yes, I'm air passenger rights is still blocked. So it clearly expresses what the transport minister has to say on air passenger rights, thinks about it, and what he thinks about freedom of expression and the democratic institutions. In terms of the committee work, another question that I received is that how does it work exactly in terms of NDP's representation on the transport committee? You are a critic for transport, but you have someone else who is the NDP representative on. How does this relationship work, to the extent that you can share with us some of the secrets of the race?
Yes, well, it isn't much of a secret, but so because it's a committee that covers both transport and infrastructure, I essentially share the work with my infrastructure critic, the NDP MP for Northern BC, Taylor Bachrach, and his work is mostly focused on infrastructure issues, but he has taken on some of the discussions and we've been in touch that relate to transportation when it's come up. Certainly in the case of if we were to have a study on the Air Passenger Bill of Rights, or I would hope on this the specific crisis of airlines taking advantage of Canadian consumers during this pandemic, that would be a study that I would be taking the lead on. But again, without a committee sitting, and even in a virtual sense, we're very limited in our ability to push on this. Now, I mean, one of the things, and it isn't rocket science, but committee studies have to be agreed on by multiple parties. We are in a minority. Even our committees reflect that. So now the Liberals do not have a majority number of seats on the committee. And so essentially for a study to go through, for example, you'd have to see a number of parties agree on that study, and I know that other MPs from other parties have said certain things, but I would like to see more MPs, regardless of party, including from the governing party, really address this double standard which you talked about. And I know one of the questions that just came in raised as well, why is there this preferential treatment of airlines in our country, and why are Canadian consumers being taken advantage of? That's something that I think all MPs, regardless of party stripe, should be on board with. I mean, this is what their constituents are dealing with. And I'm wondering, in your experience, have you heard from other MPs as well, or from people from other from multiple political stripes, I guess, that this is a concern that they agree with?
We have seen a quite strong statement come out from the Green Party, a couple of statements. A week or two ago, there was a statement from Member of Parliament Erin O'Toole on social media. Okay. I believe last week, Todd Doherty Party, he asked the question during question period, but it was a very, very fast question as to cash to any aid or bailout with respect to refunds, and the answer was, of course, a non-answer, as you have alluded to it previously. When you talk about other members of parliament, one thing that really great to see from a consumer perspective, I'm not sure how realistic it is in light of many of the other issues that may be dividing the parties, is to have a multi-partisan effort here to create some kind of accountability to the government of what happened. Because when we see that the government is remaining silent when the federal regulator acting without proper standards, when they act in a way that gives rise to visible apprehension of bias, and the government is just watching it silently. That's a sign that there is a void that needs to be filled. And the one topic for a subject that I would have loved to see already many years ago, and you probably know that I've been cautioning about it since 2017, around the time when Bill C-49 was just the early stages, is the close relationship between the federal regulator, the Canadian Transportation Agency, and airlines. And that type of relationship would ideally have to be studied by a parliamentary committee. Look, and I don't think that anybody is getting actual bribes there. I'm not suggesting that. It's not. It's happening in a way more subtle way. As you know, they saying that no, they're not corrupt because even for a great amount of money they can do justice. So, but there has to be some answers. We have to get some answers. How is it possible that all of a sudden the federal regulator is coming out with rulings, decisions? We have seen a number of other decisions which are not strictly about vouchers, where there is no any kind of input from the public. They just one day wake up in the morning and issue something which is clearly favorable to the airlines. What is exactly happening there? The public would need.
Yeah, and you're definitely pointing to something that's very problematic. Possible close relationship between the Canada Transportation Agency, the agency that is supposed to provide oversight and regulation, and the very airlines that that they're supposed to be, providing that oversight for. And so, I agree with you. It is very concerning that there is a possible close connection, and that's being overlooked by the government. I did want to also pick up on your point around around the need to continue advocacy, and I think the idea of perhaps an all-party committee or network would be a good idea, and that's, I think, especially with this crisis, the need to work together to address a concern that's affecting Canadian consumers from coast to coast to coast is perhaps the opportunity to do that. You also talked about strings attached. Now, we know that on Monday, the Prime Minister announced essentially what is a bailout package for the biggest corporations in our country. And there's some really glaring gaps when it comes to that. First, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, the airline industry, we all know, has been very hard hit as a result of this pandemic. There's no question. We know that there's been hundreds of layoffs already, which is extremely troubling. And I can say for myself that I'm thinking a lot about many people, including actually my neighbor, who works in maintenance, and whether it's flight attendants, maintenance, people that are working in the call centers, you name it. Hundreds of people have lost their jobs right now, and my thoughts are with them. So we know it's been a very hard reality. But what's concerning about this bailout that was announced was the glaring loopholes. And for example, we know just some of the loopholes that we in the NDP have identified is that companies that still take advantage of offshore tax havens are still eligible for this major bailout. So again, some of the wealthiest corporations that don't pay taxes here in Canada can still get this public money. We also know that there's still loopholes around CEO buybacks, and the ability for executives to pocket redirect this bailout money towards them rather than ensuring that none of it goes to them. And certainly what I said as transport critic is that we need to make sure that the interests of workers, of consumers, and of the public interest are involved. And for workers, we need to make sure that any bailout or any help is tied to workers' employment, including bringing back work that's been sent offshore. And we know that airlines are, are some of the worst at that here in our own country. We also know, what I've said is consumers, and I hope this is something that you can talk a bit about as well. It's not just this current crisis where we've seen airlines take advantage of passengers. Early this year, the airlines have been challenging the Air Passenger Bill of Rights in courts and trying in the federal appeals court and trying to get away from paying their own passengers when they've when they've been done wrong. And then the third piece I've raised is the public interest. I do believe there needs to be an equity stake in as part of these bailouts. Air Canada, we know, used to be a publicly owned airline. I would certainly be in favor for that to happen again. But even if that's not where it goes, there has to be an equity stake, and we cannot be forking over public money to airlines so that we can see more of the same business as usual that takes consumers for a ride and exploits workers. So so we use these issues, and unfortunately this bailout announced on Monday, while there are some references to strings attached. In fact, if you look at some of the language, it's extremely vague, and so it's very hard to believe that there are any strings. And I would say, what's interesting is that they so far we have not seen a dedicated bailout for the airline industry, and I'm wondering if part of that is because people just don't have the stomach for it. This is a sector that we know is very profitable at the best of times. It's hurting right now, but let's I think a lot of Canadians want to see Canadian airlines do a lot better for their workers, and for consumers as well. I'd love to hear any thoughts you might have on this proposed bailout and whether or not there are strings attached.
I mean, first of all, it's a no-brainer that the problem here is with the corporations, not with the nobody. Even the most rabid air passenger rights advocate would not want airline workers to suffer. They are victims as much as that's a given. With respect to what we see here in the current, we need to look at the comparison, for example, in Germany, where they are talking about the German state taking about 25.1% stake in Lufthansa in exchange for some financial help. And that makes a lot of sense, because what currently the government is trying to do and the airlines are trying to do is to socialize losses while privatizing. That's a no-go. When those shareholders have been pocketing profits, they have been benefiting from dividends over a number of years, share buyback programs. They also have to take the haircut when things go south. And things now have gone south. They are not great. So those people who have been profiteering from a burgeoning business, which is perfectly normal in a capitalism, have now also to put their hands in their pockets and give something back when things go south. It's just a basic question of ownership. If somebody has a small shop, restaurant, it may not be good, and they need more capital, they can maybe take some loan, possibly small loans, but generally, if they want larger capital, they will have to give partial ownership to whoever is providing that capital. That's how our system works. It's not a charity. There should be no difference with airlines. I'm not a great fan of the state having a permanent stake in a kind of operation like an airline. Air Canada, when it used to be publicly owned, was not really well from a consumer perspective. You have to recognize it as well. The kind of deep-rooted hatred that you see in the public still about Air Canada, which still exists, even more than deserved, I would say, is rooted in those days. You can still see that if two airlines, say Air Canada and WestJet, do the same thing, Air Canada is going to get far more negative reaction from the public. That's because of that history of. So I'm not suggesting that let's privatize airlines permanently, but certainly if those airlines want public money, they have to provide something in exchange other than a song promises, and that should be in the form of possibly bringing some work home. That's certainly a possibility. In terms of consumer rights, I would say that the airline should agree to your passenger regime, possibly even something even clearer. But when I look at what the airlines are doing now, I'm so troubled by it because it's so short-sighted, so nearsighted about discouraging consumer trust. Actually, they are destroying consumer confidence in the very industry they are supposed to be running, and then they are going to try to sell products to people who are completely disenchanted, who no longer have faith in getting back their money when they pay for a service. So how many people will actually be buying tickets that way? How many people will be buying vacations that way? I would also add that it was a very interesting proposition you raised there, that perhaps there's no stomach for bailout for airlines. I anticipate that those bridge loans are kind of maybe partially a smokescreen for a bailout. At some point, based on the dive those corporations, the government can always find excuses for that kind of thing. That's certainly a fear I have. But what is clear and what is a success for the public is that the government realized that they cannot just quote a bailout. That's a small step forward, because I don't think the public would have stomached just a package of bailout package called as a bailout to the airlines. In that sense, the airlines have again made a fundamental strategic mistake, because if they had been very forthcoming, very transparent about it, and getting out of their way to offer refunds and basically saying, well, we need some help from the government because we want to refund those money to the public, then the government may not have liked it, but the public would have loved it. They would have been a massive support for bailout. For the same, even more money going to the airlines would have been supported by the public, and quite possibly the public would have stomached less strings attached, because you're saying, well, effectively we are helping those Canadian consumers who have money in those airlines and back. So maybe I don't see something that those other people who made the decisions see, but I don't understand how they think. I don't understand their thinking about it. From a even if you neglect for a moment the moral and the legal obligations that you morally owe a refund, legally owe a refund, if you just look at it from a complete Wild West model of why will people would go and buy from those companies? Why would they support anything to those? Right now, there is a significant element of what they call a Lynch attitude, Lynch mood, that people want to see accountability, want to see these people for a good reason, by the way. And certainly, it may not be for the benefit of those businesses. I'm quite sure about it. I certainly hope that this is going to be an opportunity for a study by the Transport Committee once they are back, to look into how the aviation agency operates and their close affairs with their, look at how the airline industry operates, lobbying. What happened? Another question that troubles me, and I'm not an accountant, but it's a question that has been on my mind for time, is that normally when you have a product, you sell a product, you haven't delivered it yet, it's an unearned revenue. If you're supposed to trust, what happened here exactly? It sounds like the airlines were using money, and tour companies, money that they received from consumers, as a way to fund the services provided previous. But don't we have a name for it? How do you call a business model where you use the unearned revenue to deliver services to other people? It's a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid game.
I mean, these are, you are asking some very tough questions and shining a light on some, I would say, very gray areas. And I really want to thank you, Gabor, for expressing what so many Canadians are saying themselves. And I wanted to turn to some of the comments we are getting that are touching on some of what you've just said. So starting off here, we got a comment from David. This was from a bit earlier on in our discussion. Statistics Canada shows that about 40% of Canadians are concerned with civil disorder during COVID-19. Here we have airlines breaking the law with the support of the Canadian transportation agencies. Canadians deserve better from our government. So very
Absolutely
strong
right.
worded
And,
message from David. Yeah.
and that's exactly what I've been alluding and more, I certainly hope it doesn't come to that. But I think that the people who are involved in these kind of decisions are really don't really consider the consequences of their actions and of these mistakes, because the infuriated mob is always larger than whatever law enforcement you can bring in. If people feel that the law and order no longer functions, they are going to loot. They're going to march down to rich neighborhoods. We don't want to see that in Canada. We want to maintain our Canadian image of we are law-abiding, good citizens, good neighbors. But Canadians have a limited patience for how far they can be pushed. We are not, I always tell people that the way you can really check whether somebody is Canadian at the border, if you step on their foot, if they apologize to you, they are Canadians. Uh, but there is an ultimate limit to how far you can push Canadians. I think the airlines are getting very close to it. And the example that this sets means that if the airlines don't have to abide by the law, do I have to abide by the law? Does my neighbor have to abide by the law? Do people still have to pay their taxes? Do people still have to make their mortgage payments? It's an erosion of the public confidence in democracy, in the rule of law. And I don't think that the private financial interests of airlines, which say the airlines claim they are about 3% of the GDP, 3% of the economy is not worth undermining the whole system. By the way, that principle also applies to concerns about social distancing on board, which we have heard some concerns. See that part on flights. We have to bear in mind that 3% is a lot. That's what the airlines claim to be of our GDP. But there's 97% of the economy, which is not airlines. That cannot be compromised for the sake of the 3%. Airlines have to accept that.
And when we're talking again about this situation, or the way in which the airlines are treating passengers, is further compounding the financial stress or even ruin that some Canadians are facing. So this double standard from the government to allow airlines to conduct themselves in this way while overlooking the financial situation or stress that it's caused Canadians is shameful. So I also appreciate David's strong message. We have a message from Amina. She says Gabor Lukacs has been doing awesome advocacy for a while. We need to nationalize and public ownership of the airlines. I'm glad you have him. Amina is a dear friend and a trade union activist. And and I'd also say a Canadian of my generation, where connecting with the world, traveling, all of these things are things that we'd like to do. But in fact, the fact that we see the way we see the way in which Canadians are being treated differently by airlines compared to the way consumers are treated elsewhere. As a Canadian myself who has family abroad, my family members who've been on a Canadian airline but have been mistreated on European soil have received reimbursement, whereas the same would never happen here in Canada. And so it's such a farce that we have jurisdictions like Europe with, again, as you pointed out, a gold standard way above and beyond where Canada is right now, and it seems like the bar here in Canada is dropping lower and lower as time goes on. So I'm glad that Amina, like thousands of people out there, see you, Gabor, as the leading voice that you are, and especially during this time of crisis.
Thank you, Amina. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful that I also get sometimes hate messages. So it's wonderful when people appreciate the work that we do. And it's quite right. We seem to be having a race to the bottom type of approach in Canada, while the government and the transport minister is claiming that we have the best in the world regime. And I would say, yes, it's best in the world for airlines, perhaps, but not for the consumer.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a few more comments here. Pete reached out. No more trust. So many dirty tactics. Sunwing wanted to refund but changed course after the other airlines didn't. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to that, Gabor, and the difference you've seen from specific airlines as well.
So Sunwing around March 17th announced first that it would issue a refund to those who ask for a refund, and or if you are willing to take a voucher, you would get a voucher for a higher amount, which would have been the right approach. That's what they should have done in all airlines. Offer everybody the choice, and if they want a voucher for, say, 10%, 20%, 25%, 30% or whatever you feel comfortable with, then you can take a voucher. Then after a day or two, they realized that they didn't have the cash for it. They put it that they don't have the resources for it, and they changed their. So for everyone in such situation, everyone who is facing a situation where the airline canceled and not the passenger, the solution under the law can be quite simple, which is doing a chargeback on your card, directing your credit card to reverse the charges because you paid good money and you didn't receive a service. Some airlines may get combative, but we can then fight them and show that you actually did not receive services, that the airlines attempt to push vouchers and impose vouchers is a unilateral measure that you never agreed to, never accepted, it wasn't in your terms and conditions when you made a contract. We haven't seen the end of those disputes yet with the credit card companies. Certainly airlines are trying to fight back because it takes only 5 minutes to send back a dispute. And with something, it's really just copy paste, just a number. There's the file numbers, names are different, all the same text. So we are starting to see those. Perhaps there may be also some accountability for those lines because they are clearly leading the credit card companies. They are citing, of course, the Canadian transportation system on vouchers, knowing full well that it's not legally binding, knowing full well that it doesn't reflect the law. They're still trying to deceive consumers and credit card companies. Insurance companies are also, by the way, just for context. There are already 3 class actions also going on. 2 against Canadian Airlines, 1 against foreign airlines. I would hope that there will be some more. I would love to see a class action against credit card companies. I'd like to see a class action against insurance companies that show the public. And some of those issues have to be dealt with through our judicial system. What is a bit troubling is that even if all these legal actions are successful, which I expect they eventually, there's little personal accountability. It's not part of our Canadian culture here to take the actual people who issued those false information, take the people who ordered the frontline agents to give misinformation to passengers and hold them accountable for fraud. In European civil law type of countries, there would be some possible criminal consequences. In Canada, it's not in the fashion. It doesn't usually happen. And I think it's unfortunate because it's one thing to make a human error. To err is human. When you actually go out and deceive the public on a large scale for profit, for the motive of preserving financial gain, that should fall under some form of law type of realm, or at least some very, very significant. That is, we need to create a deterrence for it. The confidence in our economy and in businesses, the consumers to know that they can trust their merchant is something that affects everybody, whether they are NDP voters, whether they're conservatives, or they're liberals. Everybody needs that to have a functional society. Here, one of the reasons I love living in Halifax is because people are generally very. You can leave here your summer furniture on the lawn. Nobody will take it. You can leave things outside. I never had so far anything ever disappear from the porch. It's really a civic society where there is a lot of social trust, and that kind of social trust, if the business put it into risk, then they are risking the entire social fabric of not just money. That has to be addressed. It's something similar to people being afraid to walk down the street. You should not be afraid to walk down. You should not be afraid to do business. You should not be worried that merchant will. Those are not acceptable. Other places where run that way, but want to be like.
Well, and I think your point around and what we've heard from others as well is that that double standard from the government, allowing airlines, as you point out, to mislead, again, through the transportation agency statement, allowing airlines to take advantage of people, to gouge consumers, and not looking out for Canadians' best interests. And what I would also say is this is part of a broader pattern where, we know that our country, like others similar to ours, has seen growing inequality over the last number of years. And what that's meant is that the rich, often executives, CEOs, are becoming richer, and everybody else is becoming less well off, or poorer. Right, the middle class is shrinking. You're also seeing the dollar. Canadians are unable to stretch the dollar as much as we could, as our parents could, and so instead of just talking about the middle class, which the government likes talking about, what we need is direct action, including protection of consumers. And I would say this situation right now is contributing to growing inequality in our country, especially during this time of crisis. I did want to turn to a few other comments. Ken reached out. He said we need some socializing of profits. I think to your point as well, it's interesting. Germany, Angela Merkel, definitely not a left-wing politician, right? Absolutely not. Has mandated an equity stake in Lufthansa. We know Italy as well with Alitalia. Remains to be seen if I know in the UK there's a robust discussion now because all of the airlines there have been, some airlines for some time have been asking for bailouts even before this pandemic, and people have had enough. And it's interesting that this is happening on a continent where there is more protection from consumers, and yet here we're not even seeing that same drive. So I think that's something that I'd certainly like to see more of and push more of, and I would do so from my end. Gabor, I did want to reach out to you. There, we've got sort of a couple of specific comments here. One from Pamela. She says, sure, they may stomach it less, but they are going to be even more upset, consumers, when the ticket prices go up. People will travel, and airline options in Canada are very limited. I think it is not very realistic to say boycott airline X and actually stick to it. And I'm wondering what thoughts you might have to that comment.
Boycotting airlines won't work because you need to travel. When you talk about those airlines and their tricks, right now, within Canada at least, we have a race to the bottom. One thing that Canadians could do is, we have seen it in the US, most airlines are making an effort to comply with the US Department of Transport's enforcement notice, which does mandate funds, unlike the Canadian transportation. And so Canadians could say, whenever we can, we are going to buy European airlines or tickets or US airline tickets. It would not necessarily be a long-term solution, because we would like the Canadian airlines to behave, not foreign airlines to just take our money. It would not necessarily be a long-term solution. But it seems that may be a short-term necessity if the government continues this current status quo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will also point out a regional perspective here. I live in northern Manitoba. I'm joining you from Thompson. We are 800 kilometers north of Winnipeg. Here in my constituency, I represent 18 communities that are only accessible by air throughout the year, except for a very short period of time where they have access to ice roads. So airline transportation is necessary where we are. But one of the challenges here is that over the last number of years, we've seen a monopoly emerge, where one airline company has bought out all of the rest, and they now run a monopoly. And so one of the things that I've also said on behalf of our region is there should be also an approach towards regional airlines, again, where people have no choice but to travel by air. But consumers should also be protected here. We should not be allowing for monopolies, across the board. We should be ensuring competition. We should be ensuring that ticket prices are affordable. And and many have pointed out how the airlines here in our north benefit greatly from public funds indirectly, because much of their transportation is of medical patients. Again, people that are covered, but for government workers, so people that are covered by the public purse, and yet they continue to to take advantage of consumers through very high prices, changing up schedules without proper information or consultation. And so, again, it really speaks to the inability to boycott, but rather, of course, the very serious need for public pressure and political will to shut down these kinds of practices and ensure that companies aren't getting away with monopolies, with gouging, and with the mistreatment of customers like we're seeing right now.
Those things are somewhat intertied in the sense that you once you have a monopoly, you get some gouging. Monopolies develop because in a monopolistic situation, there are no consequences or no sufficient consequences to make it non-profitable. I'm wondering, I don't have an in-depth knowledge of course, your constitution. That's your expertise, but I'm wondering whether also some of the communities are somewhat shackled by various contracts that don't even allow them to bring a competitor. I would suspect some of those things happen, and that may be part of the solution, to prohibit such contracts, to sue the airlines that make such contracts. On the other hand, an important aspect would be to also bring in an economist to actually make a calculation what can be profitable. If something is an essential service like roads, hospitals, it may be a decision to bring it back to public property, to nationalize it, as opposed to public ownership. But as long as it's in a private ownership, they have to have a profit. And I will say that with all the criticism that I have about airlines, don't expect them to be a charity. I understand they are business and they have to run a profit. So it would be very nice in this kind of context to look at the calculation, to look at the actual cost of those airlines, look at their books, or look at some assessment of are they actually realizing some extraordinary profits, or is it the case that because of the unique circumstances, actually they are working with small profit margins, but the cost of operating such remote is high. And if the cost is so high, perhaps we do know that Northwest Territories, for example, Yukon, the government does provide some additional help, one form or another, because they are giving in quite extra transportation tax and so on, and perhaps subsidies. That may also be a solution. It's really a warning sign that you have only one player flying in. That's not a good sign. But in terms of the root causes, it would be worth investigating. In a sense, it's one thing that yes, people take opportunity and acting opportunistically. Also, the opportunity has to offer itself. So, what is the reason that one airline was able to buy up all that? What is the reason that WestJet or maybe a small airline doesn't go there and try competing? Are there any barriers for competition? Unnatural barriers, other than the fact that possibly this airline optimum feed them. If the idea of competition is that if an airline is selling tickets at a higher price, then someone else can come take all the traffic. But of course, if there are exclusive contracts, that's anti-competitive. Of course, that has to be.
Well, I really appreciate your thoughtful response to the reality that many face here in our region, because it is a bit different than the national one, and you pointed out to the territories as well. Unfortunately, things like tax breaks, first of all, are have not caught up with the increased cost of living. For example, the Northern Residents Tax Allowance here in the north. But then the other piece is that First Nations, who of course many who live on reserve, they don't pay tax, so they don't have access to that kind of a benefit. And in the case of these isolated communities, it's all First Nations. And as you pointed out, in fact, I do know of one First Nation that pushed back and wanted to bring in a competitor and was threatened with legal action. And so, this is appalling behavior from a corporate citizen that is the only choice in town. And this is something that I have raised with the Minister of Transportation. Not something we've seen any movement on, but I will say that this pandemic has I think also perhaps made it clearer to the company that that they cannot treat communities the way they have in the past, and right now the ridership has gone down dramatically because many of all the communities, actually the fly-in communities in our region, are under lockdown. And they've said, we're putting our public health ahead of everything else here. We're not traveling, only except for essential travel. And so, the company has been forced to find other ways of doing business. And I would hope that, coming out of this, we see them change course, but more importantly, we see the government ensure that any government support prevents them from, frankly, breaks them up at this point, and prevents them from engaging in the kind of gouging that we've seen so far in our region. So I appreciate the chance of raising that with you as well, Gabor. Pamela might just touch on the last 2 points together, and I'd like to hear any thoughts you might have, Gabor. Pamela also reached out asking me if I am supportive of your push to everyone to file credit card chargebacks. So I'd be happy to speak with that, and maybe you can share that, any thoughts as well. And then Helen reached out and said, and what about collusion? Air Canada Vacations was encouraging that in trade publications, basically asking everyone to stand firm about offering vouchers versus refunds. So to the first question, the push for filing for credit card chargebacks, I know that's something that you've been recommending for some time. I've actually passed on that recommendation to constituents as well. And I think it's, as we talked about, you mentioned tools in the toolbox, but I know you also pointed out your hope for a possible class action, recognizing that credit card companies are pushing back on this as well. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and as well the comment around collusion.
With respect to credit cards, fortunately there is already one class action in federal court, one in Quebec courts against the airlines themselves. Credit card chargebacks can just give you back the money faster. What I'm hoping is that also if the credit card companies are big and cooperative, they will also be held accountable, because it seems that there is some collusion between the airlines, the travel industry, travel agents, some of them, and the credit card companies and large banks, and that has to be abolished. It is not acceptable in a proper democratic society. Players will collude to effectively. I certainly am aware of this kind of efforts by Air Canada and other players here in travel agents. Travel agents have for a long time lived under the misconception that if the chargeback is successful, they would have to pay pocket. I find it completely reprehensible that the large corporate players have been using the travel agents as pawns in this game. The truth is that the only time a travel agent would be responsible for a chargeback is if it was a fraudulent charge. If they didn't do their homework to check a signature, then they would be responsible. So part of it, I would say, was out of fear, not necessarily because of malice, but I am also well aware that a number of organizations try to put in support of travel agents who wanted to keep money for commission purposes. And what I would like to see as an ideal outcome is there should be a round table. Airlines, travel agents, wholesaler tour operators, travel insurance, and consumers, and also banks. What we are seeing here is a system that is down. Eventually, I'm sure it will get sorted out, but it shouldn't be so complicated. People should know that their money is safe, and the industry players should know exactly what their obligations are. Currently, we are living in a kind of uncertainty. We think we know what the law is, but there have to be more mechanisms in place to automatize it. The money should not have to be dug out from unknown sources. It should be safe kept in trust until the services are rendered. The insurance company should be part of the travel tour operation, part of that. I would say that I realize that perhaps those who are in the industry are shocked to hear this from me. They often portray me as this rabid air passenger rights advocate who is all against the industry. But we have to understand that I have also family. I haven't seen my father, my grandmother for now close to a year, and probably I won't see them for another year because. So it is not that I wish ill to the industry as a whole. I just don't believe that society which is democratic, which is based on a rule of law, which is based on some form of capitalism, can exist without everybody upholding the law. We cannot have a fraud economy where corporations compete about who can shortchange consumers more efficiently. That's not good for the system as a whole. It may be good for the shareholders, but it is also against development. The way competition has to work is by introducing better technologies, more efficiency, not by better marketing tricks that leaves then the consumer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Gabor, and and I also I think when we're hearing from the comments as well is that this isn't a question of boycotting. This is a question of ensuring that that Canadian consumers are treated with respect, with decency, by following the law. You're entitled to a reimbursement, not a voucher. And making sure that the government has their back, right? And this is an instance where we're seeing that that's not the case. Where again, whether it's in response or the lack of response to my letter or previous interventions as well, or the lack of action, right? I mean, the fact that airlines can access this bailout support on Monday, and assuming airlines can access it as well, that there aren't the strings attached that we need to protect workers, to protect consumers, and in terms of an equity stake as well. And I think, and I think one of the things is here in Canada, we often get into a situation where we compare ourselves to the US, which often has far fewer protections for consumers in general, when in fact we should be looking at other jurisdictions like Europe that has the best protections when it comes to airline passengers and consumers. And I'd like to see more of that comparison and that push for the Canadian government to follow Europe's lead rather than than again that drive to the bottom. So there's a couple of other. Oh, sorry.
That with respect to refunds, we are even falling behind the U.S. because the U.S. Department of Transportation issued this clear enforcement notice, and they issued, I believe, yesterday another clarification that airlines cannot then after the fact go and change their terms and conditions. They have to hold up the bargain. It's basically a deal is a deal. That's all it is about. If you don't provide the services, you have to give back to the money. I mean, I don't think it's something so abstract. It's more. I guess. I mean, at what age do you teach kids that stealing is not acceptable? 4, 5, 6. Like kindergarten before school, they learn that this is yours. This belongs to the other kid. I think that
mine are 2.5. and we've already taught that. I mean, it's still learning experience in progress, but I mean, exactly. I mean, this is an example of legalized theft from the airlines, right? And it's it's at the expense of consumers. So and I mean, it's this isn't stark terms to put on, but I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, even the U.S. is a bit better than we are, and I mean, how shameful is how shameful is that? Is that Canada isn't is just not aiming for something better. I want to make sure we get to a couple of other points that were also raised, Gabor, and I think I'm sure we'll have comments that come up after as well that perhaps you and I can keep in touch on, in terms of how we can best respond, because I know people watch these videos after the fact and are keen to get answers. So that's something that you will definitely keep in mind. Helen also reached out. We need to deal with the short-term problem before us that thousands of airline customers have had their airfares confiscated for the benefit of the airlines. And I just wanted to bring up as well the other point by Pete. Thank you, Ms. Ashton and Dr. Lukacs, for hearing us out and standing up against the big players. Vaccines are at least 1 to 1.5 years away, and many no longer will have a need for travel. Many are elders, have health problems, or have planned events that no longer are valid, and prices are already up compared to what we bought. So I guess one point around what can be done in the short term, but the other piece around we're in this for a while, so what could we be doing, I guess, in the medium term to the longer term as well. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, Gabor, on that, and I'd be happy to speak as well to the advocacy, the political advocacy that is needed as well.
In the medium term is in some way the most difficult part, because in the short term we know that people need to get their refunds. In the medium term, somehow we need to help those airlines that are willing to abide by the law to stay afloat, because it will be a difficult times for them. And I think I would be doing a disservice to passengers if I was not recognizing that this medium term is going to be nice. So I'm not denying it. It's just a question of which pocket that money has to come from. Have to come from the shareholders' pocket, from maybe the public purse in general, or from the consumers' pockets directly. That's airlines will likely have to downsize for to run a medium term. Question of social distancing is going to be some question. One thing on which I would support airlines, which is unlike passenger airline interaction, is a truly commercial risk assessment type of transaction, is airlines will have to renegotiate their leases with the leasing companies. Normally, when you release an aircraft, you agree to pay so much amount per year, per month, whatever arrangement you have. But that is based on higher level of revenues. Those revenues are no longer realistic. So with record low oil prices, and with some of those leases being renegotiated, airlines could again become profitable even with a lower load factor. One of the things that we have seen lately from an IATA document is that many airlines would not be profitable, losing money if the load factor is below 60%. And I have no reason to doubt that ballpark of figure is correct. But that assumes that the fuel prices and the lease prices are the same. That may in terms of the medium term, as I mentioned, social distancing is a significant concern. But at the same time, we have to bear in mind that those 3% of the economy that airlines claim to be in Canada cannot dominate the remaining 97%. Yes, we want airlines to survive, no question about it. But their survival cannot be at the cost of sacrificing public health, of God forbid another outbreak, because they are not following sufficiently rules. So when I'm hearing about airlines that have passengers in this season, this time, sitting like sardines, that gives me a grave concern for public health. That has to be further investigated, and some rules will have to in the interim, because people may have to travel, and we recognize it. Airlines need to have their revenues. We also understand that, but they cannot jeopardize everybody's livelihood. If there is another outbreak, We will be back to square one. We will be back to where we were in March, and that everybody understands came significantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for raising that, and it is something that's hit the media in recent days, that you do have some airlines that are not following the social distancing regulations, which again, I mean, does it speak to the desire to amplify profits, at a very difficult time? I mean, it should just not be acceptable. They are putting the public health of their passengers, of their staff at risk, and of course, we know that given how contagious this is, so many communities that people come back to, right? So I also want to reinforce that important point, Gabor, that we need to make sure that airlines are following the public health directives, and that governments are holding them to it. And I appreciate your point about and this is something that Pete raised, that we are in this for a while, so how are we going to make this work? And that's why I think it is so important that that whether it's me or others, and including from other parties as well, is that we do what we can to hold the government to account, to make sure that yes, that Canadians have the ability to still travel. That airlines have the ability to still operate in a way that meets the needs of Canadian consumers at this time, but that we're not signing blank checks, and continuing the sort of the business as usual that we saw pre-pandemic, right? And I mean, I am very concerned that here we have the government, the Liberal government, that brought in the Air Passenger Bill of Rights, that hasn't been pushing for improvements to it, and that hasn't been pushing back on the airlines that want to get away with not paying fines to consumers that they've mistreated. And so, I think the need to hold this government to account, the Minister of Transportation, the Prime Minister as well, is very critical during this period. It's absolutely essential that any aid it has very strong strings attached in terms of protection for workers. Again, bringing back offshore work that we've seen happen over the last number of years. Protection for consumers, including getting rid of this this awful situation of
Vouchers.
The vouchers instead of reimbursements. Thank you. And I would say around equity stakes as well, to make sure that the public interest of Canadians is also part of this equation, and that interest be at the deciding table or the decision table when it comes to how these airlines will operate over the next months and in the years to come. I think many of us are talking about a different world going forward. And to me, we have the opportunity to reshape an economy where we're not allowing for CEOs and executives to ramp up profits for their benefits, to exploit workers and to take advantage of consumers, and to contribute to growing inequality. I mean, if anything, that system has led us to a situation where we've been more vulnerable to things, including like this pandemic, right? And so I think we need to see this as a time where that things haven't worked for the benefit of Canadians, that they're not working right now when you have airlines conduct themselves in this manner, and that we do need to do things differently. And I'm hearing more and more of that of Canadians, but obviously we need to continue to put that pressure on the government, that we as Canadians and I would say as well, for me as a representative, that Canadians deserve better from their government, including protections, guaranteed protections from the airline sector. And I do think in the short term, we should be, we shouldn't be just leaving it to the class action lawsuits. The point that you've raised repeatedly, that the Canada Transportation statement is just that, a statement, not a decision. And I believe that if the government truly had the political will to do so, they would be finding ways to make sure that we were getting rid of this voucher situation. I mean, again, as you pointed out, this isn't nobody can buy food or pay their taxes using these vouchers. This is a real cost that Canadians are bearing at this time, and they should be reimbursed one way or another as soon as possible. So certainly from my end, perhaps we could also wrap up, and I'll say from my end, Gabor, I'm incredibly thankful for your time, for your wisdom that you've shared today. I know your followers know it all too well, but you are really an advocate that so many turn to across the country. I would say as MPs, I know many of us have talked about your work, and I've certainly recommended to constituents that they tune in and follow your work. But again, thank you. You are a leading voice that's demanding better on behalf of Canadian consumers. That's pointing to other jurisdictions like Europe that is doing a lot better, including in this time of crisis when it comes to reimbursing passengers. And for me, what's very important is to see. To see an end to this political and economic system that sees Canadian consumers as exploitable, and the hard-earned money of Canadians as something that airlines can take advantage of. This is something that we do need the government to step up on during this pandemic, but also going forward. Canadian consumers deserve a lot better. Canadian passengers deserve a lot better. I would say workers in the airline industry also deserve a lot better, and I will certainly, from my end, welcome any feedback from folks that follow your work, on what we can be doing to continue to advocate. I would encourage people to reach out to their MP, no matter what party they're from, to reach out to the Minister of Transportation and to the Prime Minister, and to say that, we demand better, that you demand better, and that we need to put an end to this approach of the airlines, both during this pandemic and going forward.
I have a question for you. When you talk about reaching out to MPs and Prime Minister, and usually people just get canned responses. Responses are just copy-paste of a template, and they typically point back to the Canadian Transportation Agency some niceties. What good is there in writing to members of Parliament who really seem to be that their whole job is to press the right button when voting and don't really represent their constituents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's that is definitely a discouraging sign. I will say that many MPs do follow, especially any correspondence from constituents. There may be a canned response of sorts. And I would say we see that particularly from ministers' offices. But I will say that. Certainly the vast majority of MPs that I've come to know is that they do take note. If all of a sudden they're getting multiple emails on an issue from constituents, they understand that this is a sign of an issue that is of concern, that they should raise. I think it is very important to also make sure that people are carbon copying, CCing opposition members in their communication, particularly with ministers or even the Prime Minister, so that we also have a sense of what's being raised, and that we can say, look, we've received this many emails that have gone to the minister. Where is the answer to Canadian consumers on this critical issue? And I do think that there's other tools we can be looking at in this upcoming period around petitions and the like. I certainly hope that the virtual parliament continues to expand, that we move beyond just the 2 days a week, and that we also bring in the transport committee so that we have more of an opportunity to raise these critical issues. So that's something I'm going to continue to push for. I encourage others to do the same, but do not hesitate to keep me in the loop as well as I'm sure other critics would say the same from other parties when you're looking for answers from your MP, but also from the minister and the prime minister. And like I said, I think there's a growing appetite to do things differently. And we've seen the federal government take some unprecedented steps around stimulating the economy, around establishing economic supports for Canadians. But I would say, let's not give with one hand and take back with the other. And when we're providing economic supports only to have Canadians rack up personal debt because they are, again, because they've had their money taken away from them by airlines, let's put a stop to that. And so I see this growing appetite for a more just approach from corporations and from government grow, and let part of that new approach mean an end to this behavior from airlines and a strong stance from government in favor of consumers and citizens rather than corporations.
I hope everything will happen the way you described. Thank you very much for your support to consumers and air passengers.
Well, thank you very much, Gabor, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and so many that follow your work. I can't thank you enough for your time, your wisdom, and your advocacy today.
Thank you very much. Keep in touch.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.